What's up? Welcome to Crash Course AP English Language and Composition. The abstract is designating qualities or characteristics apart from specific objects or events. It is intangible and the opposite of concrete. An allegory is a narrative, either in verse or prose, in which the character, action, and sometimes even setting represent abstract concepts apart from the literal meaning of a story. Orwell's Animal Farm is an example of an allegory about Russia and communism. Alliteration is the repetition of initial identical consonant sounds, or any vowel sounds in successive or closely associated syllables, especially stressed syllables. So some examples would be Hannah's hummingbirds hummed in heavenly harmony, Olivia often offers oatmeal to others, and the common phrase Peter Piper picked. You know that one. Allusion is a brief reference to a person, event, or place. It can be real or fictitious, and it's often to a work of art. Many historical events are alluded to because of the significance they hold to human history. An analogy is the process of reasoning that assumes if two subjects share a specific number of specific observable qualities, then they may be expected to share other qualities that may not have been observed. And it's also the process of drawing a comparison between two things that are based on partial similarity of like features. So just like a battery powers a flashlight, gasoline would power a car. This is an analogy. Anaphora is one of the devices of repetition in which the same expression is repeated at the beginning of two or more lines, clauses, or sentences. So in this example from Walt Whitman, the phrase "as I" is repeated 3 times. Anastrophe is the inversion of the usual or logical order of the parts of a sentence. It is deliberate rather than accidental, and it's used to create a rhythm or to secure emphasis or euphony, which is a good sound. Anything in language capable of assuming a usual order can usually be inverted. So patience I lack is an inversion of the phrase I lack patience. Anticipating audience response. This is a rhetorical technique often used to convince an audience that of anticipating and stating the arguments that one's opponent is likely to give, and then answering these arguments before the opponent has a chance to voice them. In this way, you're figuring out the counterstatement and attacking it so your opponent doesn't have a chance to do so. An aphorism is a concise statement of a principle or precept that's given in pointed words, very few short words. It was later applied to statements of general principle briefly given in a variety of fields, such as law, politics, and even art. So Hippocrates' early medical terms were some examples of this. Also, the early bird gets the worm would be an example, and the common phrase, actions speak louder than words. Apostrophe is a figure of speech in which someone, usually but not always absent, some abstract quality or a non-existent personage is directly addressed as if they were present. So in literature, we usually see this with invocations to a higher power such as God. Attitude is the underlying feeling behind a tone. It's what the author or speaker is trying to portray. When the mother screamed at the small child, "Don't touch that hot stove," the attitude is out of concern for a child, even though the tone might sound of anger or harshness. A call to action is writing or protest that urges people to action or promotes change. Greta Thunberg and her climate strikes are a call to action for people to take better care of our Earth. Characterization are the techniques a writer uses to create and reveal fictional personalities in a work of literature. They do this by describing the character's appearance, actions, thoughts, and feelings. Chiasmus is a type of balance in which the second part is balanced against the first, but with the part reversed. Imagine a mirror in the middle of the sentence that's reflecting this sentence. Flowers are lovely, love is flower-like. The two words of love are reflected. Classification and division. Classification is a method of sorting, grouping, collecting, and analyzing things by categories based on features shared by all members of a class or group. Division, on the other hand, is a method of breaking down an entire whole into separate parts and then sorting these into groups with non-overlapping categories. A cliché is a time-worn expression that through overuse has lost its power to evoke concrete images. Some clichés that you might know are gentle as a lamb, don't judge a book by its cover, the grass is always greener on the other side, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and ignorance is bliss. Coinage is a word or phrase that is made up. It's invented or fabricated. So Reaganomics was a term that was used to describe the trickle-down economics practiced by Ronald Reagan, and man crush is a word that's used to describe a guy you think is bae. Colloquial expressions are words or phrases characteristic or appropriate to ordinary or familiar conversation, rather than formal speech or writing. They're informal and generally not used in formal language. One example would be y'all, which is a word for you all, and it's frequently used by Southerners. Comparison versus contrast. This is a rhetorical technique for pointing out similarities or differences. Writers may use a point-by-point method to interweave points of comparison or contrast between two things, or a subject-by-subject method to discuss similarities and differences between two objects. Compound complex sentence. This is a type of sentence that contains two or more independent clauses and at least one subordinate clause. Because the soup was too cold, I warmed it in the microwave. The first part is dependent on the independent part, the second part of the sentence. Conceit is an elaborate and surprising figure of speech comparing two very dissimilar things. It usually involves intellectual cleverness and ingenuity. There's this one poem that compared the two legs of lovers to that of a draftsman's compass, two totally unrelated things but talking about the same experiences. Concrete pertains to actual things, instances, or experiences. It is the opposite of abstract. Remember, real concrete is solid and tangible, and so are concrete examples. Defensive versus offensive. These are methods of argumentation in which the speaker or writer defends their own views and/or their attacks of the views of others. A definition is a method of specifying the basic nature of any phenomenon, idea, or thing. It is most commonly done by dictionaries. Denotation versus connotation. The denotation is the specific, exact meaning of a word. It's independent of its emotional coloration or associations. Connotation, on the other hand, is the emotional implications that words may carry, and they can be negative or positive. They can be private or personal, the result of individual experiences. They can be group connotations coming from a national, linguistic, or racial group. They can be general or universal and understood by all people. Diction is the choice of words in a work of literature, and an element of style that's important to the work's effectiveness. It's the words the author chooses to use. Doublespeak is language that is used to distort and manipulate, rather than to communicate. When people said the war in Iraq is about peace, that is trying to manipulate the true purpose of this war. Downplaying and intensifying are methods of drawing attention and diverting attention. Nixon's famous checkers speech with the dog was used to divert attention away from the illegal use of gifts and campaign funds. Ellipsis is the omission of a word or words necessary for complete construction, but it is understood in context. I love English as much as she. The word does is understood after she, hence the nominative she. Ellipsis can include the omission of a noun, verb, or other word. Emotional appeal is exploiting readers' feelings of pity and fear to make a case. This fallacy draws solely on the reader's pathos and not logic. One example was Camel cigarettes and how they associated it with being doctors' number one choice. Obviously, people believe in doctors, but even if we all know that smoking is bad. Ethical appeal. This type, ethos, talks about the credibility, and it's the most subtle and often the most powerful because it comes directly from character and reputation, not necessarily words. Trust me, I'm a doctor. This is a very abstract form of appeal. Ethnocentricity is the belief in the inherent superiority of one's own group and culture. This happens all the time in cultural works where authors may try to promote their own race or nationality. A euphemism comes from the Greek word meaning to speak well of. It's the substitutions of an inoffensive, indirect, or agreeable expression for a word or phrase that could be perceived as socially unacceptable or harsh. For example, private parts are a euphemism for sexual organs. Exposition is writing that seeks to clarify, explain, or inform, using one of several of the following methods: process analysis, definition, classification and division, comparison and contrast, and cause and effect analysis. Figurative language is the use of words outside their literal or usual meanings. They're used to add freshness and suggest associations and comparisons that create effective images, and these could include elements of speech such as hyperbole, irony, metaphor, personification, and simile. Well, that's it for this one. Part 2 is over here on the left, and you can find the full AP playlist over there on the right. Make sure to subscribe, like, comment, and share with your friends. Thanks so much for watching, and hope to see you in the next one.